Baruch Hashem, you're a bad Jew.
Shalom.
Welcome back to another episode of Bad Jew, the place where there is no such thing as a bad Jew. Let's please just forget the fact that my voice just cracked. With me today is Tal Oran, the Travelling Clatt. How are you today?
Doing very good. Really excited to be here, man. I'm excited for the show.
It's a treat to have you. And by the way, Tal is calling all the way from Israel. And what's really amazing is that one of my followers who's in my Bad Jew WhatsApp community commented, connected us and said, Tal, you got to be on Chaz's podcast. So shout out to Zohar Spivak in the Bad Jew WhatsApp community. It's a safe space where you can ask questions to an international Jewish community with people that are very friendly, that want to get to know you, that want to learn your Jewish story, that have all kinds of questions about their Jewish faith as well. The link is right there, badjewpod@gmail.com. Go ahead and email that. You'll be able to be a part of it and interact as well. So Zohar, again, thank you so much for entertaining this idea. It's now a reality. This is for you, Zohar. All right, Tal, as you know, we have the 4-minute Bad Jew challenge where you got to tell your life story in 4 minutes. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Excellent. Yalla.
So I was born in Miami in South Florida, 1996. I'm 27 years old. And I was born to Israeli immigrants to the U.S. who were raised mostly in the Merkaz in Israel. They came in with a big wave of Israeli Jews who moved to Miami and New York at the time, setting up the classic electronic stores that most Israelis did, like in the movie Zohan. That's kind of the life that we lived for a while. We always lived kind of on a line back and forth between Tel Aviv and South Florida. When I was about 10 years old, we full on did Aliyah, moved back to Israel to live in the country for a while. We lived in Rishon LeZion. It was very hard for me as like sort of a sheltered private school Jewish kid to reestablish full on to Israeli society. So I don't consider it sort of a good part of my life. We came back right after my bar mitzvah. My parents got divorced in Israel. And then I spent the last couple years of middle school and high school basically bouncing different schools every year around South Florida. By the time I was 17, I had become so accustomed to moving around that I decided I wanted to travel. At the age of 17, on my 18th birthday, actually, I flew to Africa on my own. I went on a trip to Zambia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa that changed my life. It showed me what backpacking and traveling was all about. And then I've spent the last 10 years, literally up until a month ago, was my 10-year anniversary, traveling around the world making YouTube videos as a full-time job since 2017. When a video of mine went viral, me sailing on a cargo ship across the Atlantic Ocean. I went from Israel to Italy on flight, and then from Italy all the way back to South Florida on a cargo ship over the course of a month and documented the journey. And that's what kicked off my YouTube career. Since the October 7th war that has begun and horrific attack that Hamas did on Israel, I have found it very, very hard to close Pandora's box in the sense of advocacy towards Israel. My channel has always been pro-Israel. It's always been advocating for Israel as more of a travel destination and trying to normalize Israel in the eyes of people. 2 years ago, I created a series that had me going into Palestinian territories, had me exploring and learning about all kinds of ethnicities around Israel, from the Ethiopian Jews to the Mizrahi Jews to the Samaritans to Palestinians to the Black Hebrew Israelites, every community possible. And it opened up a box for me. And then when October 7th happened, my heart and soul has been crushed, changed, and pretty much magnetized to Israel and topics around Israel. So since then, I've pretty much been creating Hasbara / pro-Israel content on my YouTube channel and Instagram. And that's where I'm at till this day.
That's amazing, Tal. So great job on the 4-minute Bad Jew challenge. Also, I got to commend you for the work that you're doing towards, normalizing the idea of travel to Israel and whatnot. I also want to say that I think that the biggest misconception in media, this is what we were talking about before the interview, okay? The biggest misconception in media is that all Jews are white, right? That Jews come from Europe. And especially right now, post October 7th, we're seeing that as a common narrative that pops up in these violent encampments, these encampments that are happening, all these different college institutions where Jews are being targeted, forced to go through checkpoints, and they're being told to go back to Europe. They're being told, go back to Poland. And it's like, then that totally undermines and undervalues people like you, who you are a Mizrahi Jew, and you talked about all these other different sects as well, all these other ethnicities as well that fall under the Jewish umbrella.
Yeah.
and it's especially harmful. It's harmful to their cause as well. They're the cause that claims that we have a diversity and that we care about all shades of colors, but apparently you're not dark skinned because you're
Oh,
Jewish. So
what I've
yeah,
noticed is like there's an attempt almost to silence the voices of Mizrahi Jews because we don't fit their narrative anymore. Being a brown Jew completely negates the race politics that we are so involved in the US and the West now. It's like basically the color of your skin is what gives you the right to speak on or protest or be the underdog. And Mizrahi Jews have been at the butt of pretty much all of this since, forever. We've
right.
been the ones that have been like head on in Muslim communities, oppressed, and Christian communities before that. Before Jews were even a mainstream sect in Europe on the continent. So it really affects me. Like it's become almost a crux of like my motivation to keep talking about this stuff. I'm like, nobody is standing up for us. Not only is nobody standing up for us, but like there are so many ethnic minorities throughout the Middle East, whether it's the Yazidis or the Kurds or the Amazigh or the Assyrians, the Copts in Egypt who are being ethnically cleansed by, a rampant sense of colonization that nobody's waking up to because they're not quote unquote white. But yeah, it's a lot.
No, no, no. But it's the reality. It's
Yeah.
the harsh reality that the American political system is set up to be a very black and white story. It's set up to, if you're on one side of the political spectrum, then you believe in these set things, and there's no possible way that anything that tends to lean on the other side of the spectrum could possibly be anything else but. And that's a very two-dimensional way of looking at the world. And it's what's further, even more so, because this conflict has made me feel more and more moderate in terms of my political views. I'll be openly transparent and just get rid of that taboo of not discussing politics publicly here for a second. I'm a pretty moderate person. I am left leaning, but no less. I mean, like it comes down to that if you completely subscribe to one side or the other, then you are not looking at the full picture. You're choosing to close your eyes towards something that's really important, which is that there is a reality and a validity to a lot of this. And some would call me a very indecisive, middle of the road kind of person. The reality is no, I'm not. I'm just choosing to have a more three-dimensional viewpoint before I make a decision, which everyone should come from a more informed place like that. And
That's the viewpoint that I have the most respect for, by the way, is because that's where I've always seen myself. I have very left-leaning morality things that I subscribe to, and I've subscribed to my whole life. And then I also have very right-leaning things that I subscribe to because my parents are Israeli immigrants to America who tend to be very right-leaning. And so
right.
there's things on the right and the left that I agree with, and then there's a lot of things on the right and left that I vehemently disagree with. And I've always found myself smack dab in the middle, sort of hating all sides.
Yep.
And to me, that's like it's a thing that I cannot. If you don't find yourself in the middle, to me, there's a bit of a problem with you, like where you are.
Yep.
It's like it means you're subscribing too much to the left or to the right. And balance is the most important thing in this equation because if you start going to the left or the right too much, you start negating the people who are stuck in the middle or the crossfire of this, and can't find yourself on a specific spectrum in this whole inyan in this whole situation.
Agreed. To refocus the conversation a little bit, one thing that really I became aware of a couple years ago, which is that I think as charming of a movie as Fiddler on the Roof is, it was such an iconic movie that defined what a Jew is, that it undermines other cultures and ethnicities that are in Judaism. So much so that the only Jews that are ever recognized in public are the ones that have any resemblance towards Fiddler on the Roof, which means that Fiddler on the Roof, as well as other cultural Jewish movies that have any kind of influence for that matter, are pretty harmful to the Jewish narrative. By the way, to the anti-Semites out there, that's more proof that Jews don't control the media, is that that was our one time that we ever did have a strong influence. And then after that, it's gone. Like, name for me one other time. Anyway, Tal, you know this better than anyone. Who are the Mizrahi Jews?
I just want to add to the point that you were talking about real quick before we
Yeah.
get into that. It's really important because there's a large conversation in the West and in America about representation, right? People who are of Desi ethnicity don't feel like they've been represented. East Asian, South Asian, Arab, Middle Eastern, whatever it is, have always felt. But I feel like as a Mizrahi Jew, we have zero representation. Like especially in media. Think about Hollywood real quick. When you think about the classic Jews, who do you think about? Like Jerry Seinfeld, Adam Sandler,
David.
even Spielberg, Larry David. Like there's nothing wrong with being an Ashkenazi Jew. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is in Hebrew the word is makrish. It's almost like we've been kind of pushed aside. Like they don't want to talk about us. They don't want to platform us because we kind of break the whole norm. We break the whole stereotype of the classic cream cheese lox eating bagel Jew that you would find in New York, which is what people are comfortable with a Jew being. They're comfortable with a Jew being a white person from the West. They're not comfortable with my Arab looking ass, like, and my grandparents being ethnically cleansed from the Middle East by Muslims. They got a real issue with it. So as for the question, who is a Mizrahi Jew?
Yeah.
Mizrahi Jews are an incredible sect, an incredible minority that's also very diverse of essentially who can be described as Mizrahi Jews. Mizrahi basically means of the East. Mizrahi. Mizrach is the cardinal direction east in Hebrew. So Mizrahi Jews means Jews of the East. It usually constitute Jews that were east of Spain. So you have the Sephardi ethnicity, which is sort of like the Jews that came from the Iberian Peninsula during the Inquisition, and they kind of spread across towards the east. But Mizrahi Jews are usually the Jews who came from Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, which also can be a subsect called the North African Jews, but usually they're thrown in as Mizrahi as well. But you have Jews of Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. You have the Jews of Afghanistan, of Uzbekistan, of India. These are usually seen as the Mizrahi Jews. And we're a very diverse group with different cultures. Usually there's a very big point to be made about identity, or for many of these countries before the pogroms that were committed after the creation of the State of Israel and slightly before, they felt a very big identity and pride in being from the countries they were from. So, for example, in my family, on my mom's side, were the Yehudei Bavel, which means the Jews of Babylonia, the Baghdadi Jews or the Iraqi Jews. My great-grandfather was from Kurdistan. He was a rabbi in the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq. And then my great-grandma, she was from Basra in southern Iraq, where close to Ur Kasdim, where Abraham was born. And then across my other parts of my family's lineage, there were different Jews from Baghdad and Jews from Azerbaijan, but they were all Jews that sort of came together from their different qualities of being ethnically cleansed by Muslims around the creation of the State of Israel, slightly before, slightly after, from their lands for being Jews. And that's kind of what Mizrahi Jews bond over technically, and sort of like, as Jews were being ethnically cleansed from Europe during the Holocaust, the Mizrahi Jews were dealing with their own Holocaust that was happening in the Middle East and North Africa. And that's kind of what gives us the label of a Mizrahi Jew.
Interesting. So there's a lot of different contributions to each of the different ethnicities that fall under the umbrella of Judaism. And Judaism itself, by the way, is its own ethnicity. It's an ethno-religion. But when it comes to Mizrahi Jews, I know that there are common languages that are spread amongst different ethnicities. For example, with the Ashkenazis, there was the creation of Yiddish, right?
Right.
The Sephardic, there was Ladino. What would the Mizrahi language be then? Was it just Arabic?
No, it's so interesting. Actually, it's one of the most fascinating parts to me, and it's something I'm consistently trying to learn. So I'll give you an example for my family, because I can't particularly speak for all the groups because there were so many. But in my family, actually, my grandma on my dad's side, she was born in Turkey, but her family directly traces her lineage to Spain before. So they got to Turkey after the Inquisition, and before Spain, Israel. So that was the chain. It was Israel, Spain, Spain to Turkey, Turkey to Israel again. Okay. That was like the lineage of how she went. But she spoke Ladino in Turkey. So she also spoke Turkish, but she spoke Ladino because those families that came from the Inquisition from Spain, they ended up carrying that Ladino dialect into Turkey. So
Interesting.
She spoke mainstream Turkish, that was her language, but Ladino was her secondary language. And for my Iraqi side, which is the most interesting to me, they spoke in Iraqi Jewish dialect, which they actually have full-on sidurs. There's words that we say in Iraqi Jewish dialect, which I can't quote me on because I'm really bad at it. My mom speaks it fluently, my grandparents do, but I didn't grow up speaking it, so I don't know much. And there were foods that only the Iraqi Jews ate because of the kashrut, and the specific words that they used, that it became its own recognized dialect. It's not an Iraqi dialect that you could go and speak in Iraq today. Like, Iraqis would not understand what you were talking if you spoke the Iraqi Jewish dialect. It was its own sort of language that was spoken only by the Iraqi Jews, specifically the ones of Baghdad, because it carried on from the days of Babylon. And then within my Iraqi family, the Kurdish group, they spoke Aramaic, which is to me the most interesting. It's the language of the Bible. Many
Wow.
groups of the Assyrians and northern Iraqis and even the Lebanese, they spoke Aramaic until the advent of Islam and the Arabization of the Middle East. Aramaic was kind of like the common tongue. And it's a Semitic language that stems originally from Akkadian and Sumerian. And Aramaic is the most interesting thing because it's the biblical language. It's the language that essentially our forefathers spoke. And that's what my great-grandfather, he was a rabbi in Kurdistan. That's the language that he spoke, which is to me the most fascinating. But there's so many, man, so many. Even
That
the
is
Jews,
so cool.
they have their own sort of Hindi Jewish dialect.
That's really cool. So kind of like when you're talking about these different blends of languages, it's kind of like how we see Spanglish today, right? It's like a
True.
half Spanish, half English. So they're kind of doing that. I want to see an entire Iraqi Hebrew Siddur the way that you described. That sounds really, really interesting.
I'll ask
All
my
right.
mom to get you pictures because we have it at our house. After my grandfather passed away, we took it back to the US with us. And it's a beautiful siddur. It's written in Hebrew, but the words are in Iraqi.
Wow. Send me those photos. I'll put it up on, I'll superimpose it on the screen after.
Go
That's
for
great. That's really cool. That's amazing. It's really neat. And then what about, you mentioned food and everyone loves to talk about food, right? Who doesn't love talking about food? So what kind of culinary contribution would you say that Mizrahi Jews have had to our diets?
So food's a really touchy subject in the Middle East. I've noticed as a YouTuber, anytime I've tried to give like Israeli cuisine a bit of a boost, there's always like Arabs in the comments who are like, "You fucking stole this from the Arab world. This is our food. How dare you Jews and Israelis? You have nothing original. You just stole our food." The problem is that people don't understand is that Arabs colonized the Middle East and North Africa. It was a very small group that came from a specific place. Arabic was not the language spoken across the Middle East. So imagine from Morocco till Iran, that script of Arabic script like Farsi was written in a different tongue. It was written in a different language completely. Same in Iraq, same in Lebanon, same in Israel, same in Judea. And so the same exact concept comes to food. Through their colonization of the Middle East, Arabic food that came from the Arabian Peninsula was introduced to the Middle East. So saying specifically what is like a specific Mizrahi food is very, very hard for me to pinpoint. But again, I can give you an exact example from my family. We have a thing called kuba shwandal. That's the name. You know what a kuba is or kibbeh? Have you ever had that before?
No, never. No.
Kibbeh is a very popular Arabic. It's eaten across the Arab world. It's usually using bulgur or semolina flour to create a pocket, almost like a dumpling, and then you usually stuff it with meat. There's a bunch of different ways to eat it, but the Iraqi Jewish one, the very specific Iraqi Jewish version, is called kuba shwandal. Shwandal in the Arabic dialect or in the Iraqi Arabic dialect means beets. So if you know what borscht is, kind of like the Russian beet soup, similar to that, with a lot of sugar and lemon, it's kind of like a sweet and sour soup that's very pink.
Interesting. Okay.
And then you take these semolina flour dumplings and you mix them with beef side and you boil them in the soup. It is my favorite food of all time. I grew up eating it. My grandma made it for me. My mom makes it for me. I make it for people. I learned how to make it a few years ago. And it's like when I built my own house in the Philippines around 2 years ago. And I had a chamkat bite there where I invited all the Jewish people on the island that I was living on to come. That was the dish that I decided to make for everybody, was kuba shwanda.
That's amazing. Well, maybe in the future I could do an episode about who the Filipino Jews are. That's really cool, though. The food sounds amazing, and I understand it could be muddied waters. It's even controversial to say, "Oh, I love Israeli salad." Well, I think a lot of people in that region would probably say that's Mediterranean salad. I love Israeli food, but then I like falafel. Well, it's not Israeli food; it's Mediterranean food, apparently. So, I mean. Okay, fair enough. If you want to claim that, so be it. But I understand, though. It's what you're saying. There's one. I remember one time I was in Israel. I was there in 2017 at the end of my Europe trip, and we stayed with a family, and he treated us to something called jakhnun. Have you ever had that before?
That's the Yemenite food, the Temani food.
Would that also fall under the Mizrahi cuisine?
100%.
Yeah.
Jasmine is actually probably a better example than kuba shwanda.
Okay.
But jasmine is eaten exclusively by the Yemenite Jews. It's not found really in normal Yemeni cuisine. And it's a big I actually know how to make it pretty good as well. It's a flour, a doughy mixture of sugar, butter, and a lot of either date syrup or honey, and you roll it out into a very thin sheet, and then roll that up into a log, which you sit in the oven over Shabbat, usually for 8 or 9 hours, and then you eat it in the morning with grated tomatoes, schug, which is like a spicy salsa, and a boiled egg. And
Oh,
it's the
good.
best thing
Yeah.
ever, but it also makes you feel like you're gonna die after, like you pretty much go in like system collapse.
I remember it being like a crepe almost with they did it a little bit differently with like some kind of cream in it. So they went for like a more sweeter version of jachmi. It was really good though. There's probably a lot of ways to prepare it. No less. Absolutely loved it. And I want to try more Mizrahi food. There should be more Mizrahi cuisine out there that's more public. That's really great. And then one thing you also touched up on before, this is something that your family personally experienced, were the pogroms that happened before and during the creation and the inception of Israel. So, and by the way, was it only during the creation of Israel, or was it far before? Or is it still going on? What is the story of these pogroms that have happened to Mizrahi Jews?
So I tend to tiptoe with my words, but I've become a little bit more confident about talking about this in my recent days, especially since October 7th. I've sent you a list on our chat here in the thing. I don't know if you can open it up on your computer to see it as well, but
Yep. Mhm.
it's basically a list going back since the 7th century, since 622, um, showing all the massacres that were committed by Muslims against Jewish people and Jewish minorities, both in the land they know nowadays as Palestine or Judea, till the modern day, and across the Middle East and North Africa. So Muslims have been this idea that, especially in the modern day, Muslims try to send that we all lived in peace prior to the creation of the state of Israel, prior to 1948, it's an absolute sham and a lie. And a lot of times Muslims like to say, like, especially during the Ottoman Empire, of the rule of the Ottomans, which were colonizers to this region, to Israel, they like to say, oh, under Islam, the old city of Jerusalem, everybody was free to pray. Yeah, they were until they weren't. Like it was a 400-year rule by the Ottoman Empire. There were periods of times where Jews were not allowed to pray at all, and then there were massacres committed against them in the old city of Jerusalem, like in the 1800s, and then again in the 1600s, which can be seen in this list, which is documented and factually correct with a lot of sources. My family personally, they experienced the Iraqi Farhud, which happened as it's actually considered as a canon event within the series of the Holocaust. And it's beautiful that we're talking about this today on Yom HaShoah, on Holocaust Remembrance Day. My family was in Baghdad in 1941 when the Iraqi Farhud began, which was a night that essentially the Muslim Iraqi society decided that the Jews were no longer Arab citizens of this country. They stripped them of their citizenship, ran them through their homes, slaughtered, killed, and raped around 120 Jews in the city, stole all of their wealth, and then started ethnically cleansing them systematically out of Iraq, to the point that there's no Iraqi Jews left. I think there's 2 documented now. Most of them immigrated to Israel between the years of 1940 to 1950, 1960, and the last sort of waves happened in like 1980. But there were Jews immigrating here up until 1970. That event happened before 1948, well before 1948. That was in 1941. My family eventually pushed out, just became uncomfortable with the idea of living in Iraq in the 50s. They actually ran to Iran, and Iran helped send them to Israel because Iran at the time was a great ally of Israel. But yeah, what happened to the Iraqi Jews was inspired by Hitler. It was inspired by the Nazi party, by the SS. They had direct ties to them at the time, the same way the Grand Mufti of Palestine, the Palestinian Grand Mufti, had well-documented pictures holding hands with Hitler and being very happy with him. There was a rampant ideology of ethnic cleansing and a desire to kill and mass murder as many Jews as possible around the Middle East during that time. And the Iraqi Farhud was a very sad event that happened directly to my family, to my grandparents at that time.
I'm sorry for the atrocities that have been committed to your family as well as many others, and may their memories be a blessing. I'll also have this on the screen as well, but like just to go through the list here from medium.com that you shared with me, this long list of different, violent crimes committed by Muslims against Jews since the 7th century. Starting with the very first one from 622 to 627, that's a 5-year pogrom, ethnic cleansing of Jews from Mecca and Medina. Jewish boys were publicly inspected for pubic hair and executed if they had any. Okay. Going further down, 627, elimination of Jews, Qurayza clan in Medina. Let's go scroll further down here. 948, closure of the Jewish Theological School of Baghdad, Sora. Let's go further down. Let's go to something. I mean, by the way, I'm skipping like tens of different dates here. 1333. Yeah.
Crazy.
1333, the traveler Ibn Battuta complains that Genghis Khan, I'm probably butchering this name, so forgive me, Jagatai allows Jews and Christians to repair their places of worship. Okay, so that's better. 1391 in Morocco, persecution of Jews from Spain. So now we're talking about the Inquisition. 1521, expulsion of Jews from Belgrade by the Ottomans. Let's go further down. 1747, massacre de Mashhad in Iran. Go further down. 1806, ban of Moroccan Jews wearing Western clothing. Let's go further down here. Let's get closer to the 1900s. 1891, fourth massacre of Damanahur in the Ottoman Egypt. Go further down. 1928, so this is before the Holocaust now. Jewish orphans sold into slavery and forced to convert to Islam by the Muslim Brotherhood in Yemen. Now we're going into the Holocaust. Now this is during World War II, 1941, the persecution of Jews in Libya. Here's another one. Now going to the year that Israel was created in 1948, attacks by the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood against Jewish traders. Let's go post-Independence Day, 1955, anti-Jewish riots in Izmir. Further down, 1969, execution of Jews in Baghdad. And the last documented thing on this article is 1979, start of the flight of the 200,000 Iranian Jews after the Islamist revolution. So, yeah.
Don't let anybody tell you that we lived in peace, because Christians and Jews have never lived in peace under Islamic rule. And then prior to Islam being created, Jews never lived in peace under the Christians. You know, we've never lived in peace, period, even before the Christians. It was the Romans trying to kill us, the Persians, the Greeks. It's been a constant struggle of survival in our homeland. But don't let anybody tell you that we lived in some fantasy world of peace, because yeah, maybe there were waves. There were points in times where we were tolerated. Our existence was tolerated, ebbed and flowed. But remind you, the same way that Jews don't feel safe in the world today, my ancestors, your ancestors, they didn't feel safe back then either. They remembered all the massacres. That's why they're documented today in 2024. That's why we have this list. They remembered them then, and they remember them now. So back then, the same way we don't feel safe in Muslim society today, we didn't feel safe back then. Maybe we appreciated it for a certain period of time, but we never felt safe. We were never equal. Don't let anybody tell you we were.
So one more question before we wrap up this, and that is that you're a traveler. You do this on a regular basis. You do a lot of travel vlogs on a regular basis, and they're really fun to watch, by the way. Everyone should seriously go and check out his Instagram and his YouTube channel, Travelling Clatt. By the way, I'll take my paycheck after this interview. Thank you. But everyone should go. But in your travels, have you had the chance to visit any Mizrahi or previously Mizrahi location, like any kind of Mizrahi synagogue in its original place anywhere in the Middle East?
I can tell you a story about it. It's pretty interesting. I tried in Egypt. I went 2 years ago on a trip to Cairo, and I was very fascinated to try to explore some of the Jewish heritage of Cairo. I tried to go to the Great Synagogue. I think it's called the Great Synagogue of Cairo. It's obviously, there's no Jews left in Egypt. There's no Jews left in Cairo. They're all gone. Imagine our neighboring country, Egypt, no Jews left, where we know there is rife Jewish history in Egypt, way before Islamic rule. They have blocked off that synagogue completely, and nobody can actually even go. I tried going just to take a picture of the Magen David, and like 4 police officers ran towards me, made me delete the photo, and told me I can't even be next to the building. So there used to be a Jewish quarter in Cairo. It's been pretty much completely erased. There's no remnant of it left. Been multiple documentaries, both by the BBC. A great fan of mine, Alec, from the Insightful Nomad YouTube channel. He was recently in Cairo and showed what it was like to tell people that he was an Israeli. If you look up the YouTube video, it's like, what is it like to be Israeli in Egypt? He made a video that's gone really well. It's like at 500,000 views right now, that shows you the reaction of Egyptians today towards Jews. That's the closest I've gone to showing like what a Mizrahi ancient Jewish synagogue might have been like. And it stopped me at the entrance. I couldn't go inside, couldn't explain, couldn't talk to anybody. I don't know if they're shamed of it or embarrassed, or they just don't want any connection to their Jewish history. But there were hundreds of thousands of Jews in Egypt. One of my best friends is an Egyptian Jew, and it's a sad reality that there's none left, and they kind of don't want to. They don't want to own up to it at all.
It's a shame. It's a shame. Okay, I lied. I have one more question.
Go. I'm an open
Passover.
book.
Okay, cool. So Passover just happened, and for a lot of Jews around the world, the ending of Passover is kind of anticlimactic. But I know that from Mizrahi culture, there is a holiday called Mimouna. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that, and also have you personally had the chance to celebrate?
Of course, my best friends growing up in South Florida are Moroccan. They're like my childhood friends. And I always say to people, anybody who's like a Mizrahi Jew that's Moroccan mixed with something else is like won the lottery. Moroccans have the reputation of having like a fiery spirit, very spicy people who are like can be very angry, but they're also like the most loving, warm-hearted families. Like they're the best, and they make the best food. Debatably, in the Mizrahi culture, it's the best food. So Mimouna is an event that actually happens besides being Jewish. It's something that Muslim Moroccans celebrate as well. It basically just means a celebration in the Moroccan dialect. And Jews have done it in Morocco to celebrate the end of Passover for, decades before they moved to Israel. And now coming to Israel has become an amalgamation, a mixing pot of all these cultures. Mimouna has just been thrown into all the Sephardi cultures. So if you don't have Moroccan family friends, usually even if you are like Iraqi or Lebanese or Egyptian or Jordanian Jew, whatever Jew you are, usually you'll still celebrate Mimouna. But if you have Moroccan friends, you usually go to their house. And the concept is you play Moroccan music, you bring out a lot of baklawa, knafis, all the sweets. You play, a lot with the dalbuka. You dress up in the traditional Moroccan garb, and then you eat a thing called mufleta or sphinge. Mufleta is very similar to a crepe. It's kind of like a rolled out piece of dough that you would put like honey or sugar water on it. And the sphinge is basically it's kind of like a fried donut. It's like a donut if you were to fry it again. It's like a very airy pastry that you also put sugar syrup on it. And you sing like typical Moroccan Berber songs. And like the one that's like, everybody knows this song.
I don't
And
know the song, but I was enjoying
Yeah, so you basically do a hafla, which is what we call in Hebrew, which is like a big balagan, a big celebration, music, instruments, celebrating the exodus of Egypt, that we made it to the end of Passover, and we don't have to eat matzah anymore because Sephardi Jews do not like eating matzah at all. For the most part. The second we can have some good bread again, we're like, fucking give me, let me get in. I don't want to eat matzah anymore.
All right. Can you do that song one more time, though?
Oh man, I need to remember the lyrics. I think it's like ahlan wa sahlan. If you do everybody sits there, somebody will be in the middle, and you just go, great. There is so much fun.
I got to experience one day. I got to go. I need to make more Moroccan friends. But Tal, this has been a great interview. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. What is the best way for people to connect with you, to follow you, support your work?
I'm pumping out as much content as possible, both on Instagram and on YouTube. YouTube is like my main hub. Instagram is a great place to find me as well. At the Travelling Clatt on both. I have a Discord community as well where you can come engage on conversation. It's just the official Travelling Clatt Discord. It can be found in the links on my YouTube channel and pretty much anywhere else on the internet, like X or all the other platforms you can find me on.
Amazing. Tal, it's been a real treat to have you on the podcast. It's been really eye-opening and really enlightening to learn about this beautiful culture, this beautiful, diverse, rich history that you've described, full of beautiful moments, full of terrible moments. It's really incredible story. So thank you for doing justice to the Mizrahi people, to shedding light on this. And to the listeners of Bad Jew, please follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Leave a review on this podcast. DM me anytime. I love your DMs. I love your recommendations. I love your criticism. Yes, I said that. I love your criticism. Also, be sure to go to badjew.co. That is badjew.co to buy your merchandise. Your merchandise helps fund the Bad Jew cause, where we actually are able to help more people run events from their homes in the Bad Jew community. So thank you again to the listeners, and we will see you next time.
Shalom.